Welcome back to this episode of Uncover the Human. We are joined with our guest, Betsy Westhafer. Welcome, Betsy.
Hey, how are you, Alex? Hi, Christina. Great to be here.
Hi, great to have you.
Great to have you on. We got to meet Betsy at CamCon a couple months ago, and we were a huge fan of her presentation. But let's give it to you, Betsy. What's your background? What are you doing? What are you up to?
Yeah, thanks. So what I'm doing now, I am the CEO of the Congruity Group, and we do executive level strategic customer advisory boards. So basically, we work with our clients' executive teams to have a systematic way of engaging with the executives of their strategic accounts. We have a whole methodology for how we do that. I love everything about what we do. Most importantly, the impact we're able to make on our clients, but it's an education of a lifetime sitting in the boardrooms, hearing these executive level conversations, and developing the relationships and validating strategies, all those kinds of fun things. So that's what I do now. The path that got me here was a little twisted, but I did a lot of entrepreneurial things, just kind of all over the board. I was the stereotypical entrepreneur where I had, an idea every 15 minutes and couldn't really maintain my focus and struggled with that for a number of years. And then fortunately, landed on this with some help of some colleagues that asked me really good questions. And I'd love to share how that happened. I had gotten to the point where I had exited a company that I had co-founded, and that gave me just a little bit of runway to kind of figure out what I wanted to do next. And I was thinking, I have interest in this. I have interest in that. I might be good at that. Here's something that has always intrigued me, just kind of all over looking at all the options. And a friend of mine, former colleague, said, "Stop for a minute, Betsy." She said, "Instead of thinking about what you could do, think about what you have done and where you've made the greatest impact." And I was like, without a doubt, customer advisory boards. And I just thought it was such a great question because I had not thought about looking backwards. Nobody teaches you to look backwards. And I was like, customer advisory boards. And she said, "Well, why aren't you doing that?" And I was like, I hadn't even thought about it because I had done this work for another company about 15 years ago. And so I took the time that I usually take, which was about 15 minutes, to really think something through. And I decided, that's where I want to plant my flag. Started working on a net company name and a logo and website and off to the races, and got fortunate that I got a couple of quick wins with some clients, and then it's just grown from there. So it's been about 7 years since we started Congruity, and we're located in Dayton, Ohio, and we're growing pretty quickly, and it's getting very exciting, and our team is growing, our client list is growing, and it's just a really fun place to be right now.
That's incredible. Yeah. Wait, just for context sake, for anybody who doesn't know, what is a customer advisory board, especially from your point of view?
Yeah. So, you always hear about these companies that put a lot of money into R&D, put a lot of money into marketing, put a lot of money into product development, product launch, and they go out and the product or service falls flat. And that's because they did all of that work in a bubble and they didn't actually engage. And we're not talking about focus groups, with the feature function type stuff. We're talking about strategic decisions that help make sure that a product is going to succeed in the marketplace. So what we do is we bring those decision makers, those market decision makers into a room with the company and have them on board the whole journey. And that includes business model, the operational side of it, the marketing and messaging, the challenges in the industry, anything that is going to provide those strategic insights to the host company to help them succeed and grow.
Nice. Yeah, I remember when you gave your speech at CamCon, as you were talking about the success of bringing the executives together and being in the same room and being on the same page and the constant of that. So not just once or the beginning or the end or in the middle or when the account is in jeopardy, but throughout the whole process, how it really reminded me of change management success. In change management projects, there's a very clear distinctions when there's constant dialogue with the executive sponsoring the change. And when there isn't, it's almost a direct impact of the success of the change.
Absolutely. And so having that methodical approach and having somebody that this is our expertise. This is our day job. It's what we do all day, every day. I've seen other organizations where they try to manage it internally and they try to squeeze it into their day job, and inevitably things start falling through the cracks or priorities take over. And so then you get this hit and miss, fits and starts kind of cadence with these meetings, which actually can do more damage to a relationship than if you have somebody that's helping make sure that it happens all the time. Because that consistency, to your point, Christina, that consistency is what really, really elevates these conversations, and what helps deepen the relationships, builds the trust, really creates that opportunity for forward progress. Basically co-innovating with the customers that you want to spend their money paying for your products and services.
Co-innovating, that's a great word choice. It must be fairly well facilitated conversations, because that would be easy to go off the rails if you're not being very careful with it. Do you guys provide a lot of that service too? Feeling like I would imagine having that third party would be super helpful.
Yeah, we really advise people not to try to do this themselves, not to be self-serving. I mean, use us, use somebody else, but really having that third party. And there's several reasons for that. One is you are putting your executives in a room with the executives of your strategic accounts. That is a high risk initiative, because if it doesn't go well, the damage can be pretty significant. So you want to make sure that whoever's doing it knows what they're doing, preps the executive team going into it, make sure they're aligned. Left hand knows what the right hand's going to do and say going into this meeting, that they're well versed on who else is in the room. But the other reason is you don't want to have to shut down one of your customers. If you're facilitating it yourself and some guy goes off the rail or girl goes off the rails or goes deep into something that's just relevant to them, it's very awkward if they're your customer to try to shut that down. And so having a neutral bad cop kind of person in there that knows how to gracefully get that back on track is good. And then finally, the third reason is just being able to ask questions with no bias and then do the report back with no bias. So it's nobody's fault. It's just human nature that if somebody has skin in the game or has an agenda wanting the conversation to go a certain direction, it's very, very difficult for them not to lead it down a path. And so as neutral third-party observers, we're able to facilitate that meeting in a way that's going to get to the actual heart of what's being discussed without the bias injected into it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. The third party unbiased piece, I find it's very important because of that. There's relationships, then there's relationships that have perspectives and have agendas, their own agendas, trying to form, and having your group outside, like looking in and be like, okay, the success here is the relationship actually working. And so it's not about, who wins and who loses or taking one side or the other. It's totally neutral. It's about the process and getting the relationship to succeed.
Right. And you certainly don't want your customers to have visibility into that internal infighting or land grab or ego contest or any of that. So this really helps neutralize that.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've definitely had some experiences with the executive land grabs and the personalities.
Yes.
Yeah, it happens.
So how much, it sounds awesome, like just a learning experience. You get to have these conversations across, I assume, many industries. Do you guys have a particular verticals you see, or anybody who can come through the door?
Yeah, our methodology works for any industry, any size company. We work pretty much exclusively with enterprise-sized companies across several industries. It's funny, we haven't really targeted an industry, but we find that logistics companies are coming to us, which is really exciting in light of everything that's going on with supply chain and just all of the challenges in that particular industry. We are getting into healthcare a lot more, which I also really embraced because there's a lot going on there. There's so many conversations that need to happen in each of those industries. And then we have online, like technology companies, that we have a client that does online literacy curriculum, which is also, it's been fascinating to sit in these meetings and hear what they are going through with, when schools were shut down and just all of the challenges that are going on in schools right now. The conversations that happen are very serious, very, have long-term impact for our kids and just the future. And so a lot of these conversations that we have are so hot and relevant right now and for the foreseeable future. So like I said, we don't target a particular industry, but the industries that are finding us are really industries that we enjoy participating in.
That's wonderful.
Well, all those are great examples of ones that would need strong partnerships with their customers too, in logistics, healthcare, and education. Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't get much more impactful than that.
Definitely. So what have you found some of the challenges and also wins when you bring in humans together in a room? They have, an agenda, because they come in with the agenda, and they also have, a certain personality level. I mean, executives are usually, people that go in and are like, okay, let's get to work. Let's get this done. What decisions am I supposed to be making, and walk out?
Yeah. If we do our job well, we pretty much have them ready to go in and just receive the information. So we do a full coaching session, prep session in advance of each meeting with the executive team of the host company. And so we talk to them about things like, your job is to listen 80% of the time and talk 20% of the time, which that's an adjustment for an executive. And then we further that and say that 20% of the time that you're talking, that should come in the form of asking probing and clarifying questions, because your job is to really dig deep, find out what they're really saying. And so we coach them also, like, you're not here to find a solution. You're not here to do anything. You're not there to process what's going on, what you're hearing. It's just gather the information. And then when you get back to the office, you can decide what to start doing with what you heard. So we really coach them to just listen and ask really good questions. That's really all they have to remember. We also tell them, when they're responding, not to say things like, yeah, we tried that already, it didn't work. Mm-hmm. Or, oh yeah, that's definitely something we'll do. You don't want to make any promises that you're going to do anything. You don't want to negate what somebody's having to say. You don't even want to say things like, oh, good point. Because if you say that to one board member and not to another one, it might make that other one feel like, oh, I guess my point wasn't good. And it will tend to shut people down if they're not getting the same kind of feedback. So we just coach them to say things like, we'll take that under advisement, or thank you for sharing that point, or something very neutral rather than any kind of validating type statement when they hear what the customers are saying. So generally speaking, we don't have a lot of challenges with the executives because we do a lot of work up front to make sure that, and by virtue of making the investment in us, in taking these customers to a nice location, being out of the office for 2 or 3 days, it's a huge overall investment for them in terms of time and resources. So generally speaking, if their mindset is to do an initiative like this, generally speaking, they are open-minded to the feedback and want to listen and want to hear what they have to say. So it's really not too challenging with the executives that we work with.
Those are some great execs.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead, Christina.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, it was excellent examples of how to be in the room without going to default mode. It's, and the time, the preparation time, I'm sure it's very valuable because the default mode is so the day-to-day for the executive levels. Hopefully they take some of the skills that they learn, the 80% of listening, they're only asking clarifying questions to outside of the customer advisory board and even with their own leaders and their own teams.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now I will say that like we build in a lot of networking time, a lot of breaks, of course, nice dinners, hanging out in the bar afterwards, all that kind of stuff. That's their chance to really start building the relationship, maybe talking a little bit more, sharing some stuff. And I failed to mention, and this is really a key point, all of these conversations are held under NDA. So we're really looking for the customers to share things that they might not normally share, but also for the executives of the host company to share. For example, when the meeting kicks off, we might ask the CEO to share their strategic plan and here's some of the capital expenditures we're looking at. We're looking to expand into this market, different things that may not be public knowledge yet, that this core set of customers will have access to hearing before anyone else. So the fact that it's an NDA type conversation also helps build that trust and helps the executives really want to listen to what they have to say.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's I'm interested to hear what their reactions are. Do you get to talk to any of the customers afterwards as well? What is the feeling on either side after these?
Yeah. So what we do at the end of each meeting, we separate the host company from the customers for about a half an hour, and we do an oral debrief and then a printed survey. And so generally one of our consultants will take the customers and say, okay, what do you want to tell us that maybe you didn't want to share in the room, as far not specific to the conversations, but what went well? What would you like to see more of? What topics would you like to discuss in the next meeting? Anything that we can improve upon. We have just this conversation. So we do get some good insights. It's not anything that they're necessarily withholding during the main meeting, but there may not have been an appropriate time to share it. So we try to get the last bit of insights that we can get from them at this debrief at the end of the meeting. And so then we do a survey. And what we measure our success on is, one of the questions on the survey is, how would you rate the value of this meeting on a scale of 1 to 5? And we know that if the customers are feeling that it's a highly valuable use of their time and that they're getting a lot out of being a participant on this board, that by default, that will be highly valuable to our clients. So that's the metric that we watch at Congruity to make sure that we're doing our job well. And I'm super excited that over 7 years, the meetings that we've done over the last 7 years, our average value score from the customers is 4.87 out of 5. So we know we're doing something right.
Yes.
And that's very important to us because, like I said, that becomes very valuable to our clients.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, that is a high score.
Yes.
Yeah, we're working really hard to keep it that way. That's one of the things we look at every week in our team calls, is that metric, because that's where we know we're succeeding, if we can keep that score up above that number.
I'm definitely curious too what other kind of takeaways from the executives get, just not necessarily strategic decisions, obviously, since that's NDA covered, but what they feel like this has got to be, like Christina was saying, a bit of a different operating mode. What does it feel like on the customer side? What do they feel from it?
Yeah. There are a lot of different places of value for the customers. The biggest one is probably having access to the leadership team of a key supplier. So access and influence. So if you think about it, if you're dependent on a key supplier to run your company, and that key supplier invites you into this confidential conversation and says, what do you think? And how would this work best for you? That's a huge value to the customers, to be able to weigh in on those strategies and make sure that this is going to continue to be a long-term working relationship now and whatever's on the horizon. So that's a big element of value for the customers. Another one is that peer-to-peer interaction. If you think about all of these customers coming around the table, and we usually have 10 to 15 executives in the room with the host company, and we like to do a 2-to-1 ratio. So we have 2 customers to every 1 executive from the host company, and you're bringing them together. And they all have this common experience of being in the same role, because we make sure that the levels are peer-to-peer, and working with the same supplier. So they can talk about best practices, they can talk about challenges, they could talk about use cases, they could talk about maybe this customer's using ABC services and this one is not using B. And and this is what I love when this happens. The customers start kind of cross-selling each other. Like, oh, you don't use them for B, you should use them for B. They do a great job on B, and you absolutely need to start thinking about talking to them about this additional service. And so the host company sits back and watches their customers cross-selling to each other. It's magic when that happens. And it happens a lot more than you would think. So there's just a whole lot of value in the value of having a peek behind the curtain. You know, they're hearing things before any of their counterparts are hearing them, and they can base their decisions on what they're hearing in the room. So, and that reminds me of a story I'd love to share. One of our clients, we had 2 board meetings, but it was one CEO's first meeting. This was a logistics company. The people in the room were the executives of pretty much every major retail brand you've ever heard of. And at the end of the meeting, my client came up to me. He is the chief commercial officer. And he was like, Betsy, you're not gonna believe what just happened. We're still in the boardroom. We're packing stuff up, saying our goodbyes, blah, blah, blah. And the chief commercial officer comes up to me and goes, you just won't believe what happened. And I said, what? And he said, this one CEO came up to him before he even left the boardroom, and it was his first time attending this cab. And he said, you know, I got to tell you, a year ago, we decided we were done with you guys. And we've started talking to your competitors. We couldn't see your commitment to us as a customer. We couldn't see where you were heading, couldn't see how working with you was going to help us succeed. And he said, we've already started the process to move on. He said, I got invited to this. I thought, well, I'll see what they have to say. And he said, now I see how your strategies align with ours and how I'm going to grow my company. I see how committed you are to the customers. And so our contract with you is up a year from now. Let's renegotiate it now. Let's make it a 3-year deal. And let's add on all of our international business, which was amazing and huge. And so at that point, my client says to me, as far as I'm concerned, the first 2 meetings have paid for the next 10 years of CAB meetings. But then what happened, and this is where it gets really exciting, that CEO became such an advocate for that company, the host company, that they made a referral to another retailer in the UK. That retailer became a customer of our client, and then very quickly rose to be a top 20 account for them. So if you think of the ROI of this, it's a big outlay initially, but the ROI is, and honestly, that's not an unusual story. It's a big story, but it's not an unusual story. And so the ROI, not to mention all the relationship building and trust that goes on, and that's one member of one board. And we have some clients that have multiple boards, either by industry or by vertical or by geographic region, and they have multiple boards and then multiple people serving on those boards. So you extrapolate what that, when those kinds of things happen and you take it by 20 or 30 people, how explosive that can be for your company.
Yeah, that's incredible. It must be great to know those stories and see yes, this is magic. it is working.
It really is. It's very, very fun to watch that happen. And that's what I've captured a lot of these stories in my book. And that's what I really want to put a real example of what this can do for your company to explode its growth.
Yeah. So powerful.
I always talk about wanting to work with human nature rather than work against it. And this is just such a great example of it. You've got people getting interact. They all want to help each other. You get into a room where you can actually just be transparent. Suddenly everything is just connecting. Everybody's willing to shed the armor a little bit and actually make the connections. It's very inspiring. It's really cool to see that working on such an explosive scale.
Yeah. And it's fun for me because I have always been a very anti-conflict person. I just want to hold hands and have everybody be happy every day, and it's just my nature. And so, we go into these boardrooms and we're not trying to come to consensus, and we're not trying to solve a dicey issue. And we're not doing anything other than, how can we work really well together? What do you need from me? How can we support you? Here's what we're thinking. Do you think we're on the right track? And it's just, it is kind of a kumbaya kind of meeting where it's just for the betterment of everybody in the room. And that's what makes it really, I love the impact and all the things we've already talked about, but this is what makes it so much fun, is because everybody's so happy to be there to try to help one another.
Humans helping humans.
Yep.
Yeah. I think it's funny you mentioned that's just kind of your nature. You tend to be, a little bit more or less, let's all get together and get along. But that would then imply you perfectly aligned your values, how you would like people to interact with creating an entire company around it. It's a wonderful synergy there of just what you wanted, what you created, and what that can do. It's really cool.
Yeah. And it's like I said, it's been a long, twisted road to get to this point. And I do think, and that's why I love what you guys do on your podcast, when you align with your own values and what matters most to you, and you're really in your authentic space, that's when great things really start to happen. And that's where I find myself at this point in my career, is doing the things that just feel right to me. I know we've talked a lot about what that authenticity means. And I think I shared with you, just kind of backtracking a little bit, many, many years ago, I had a position with a company, and I can tell you exactly, it was 1999. And I had 3 small kids and was commuting to this job. And it was just a very bad year for us personally. We lost my dad. 9 weeks later, we lost my father-in-law. So my kids lost both grandpas in a matter of 9 weeks. We had 2 siblings diagnosed with cancer. We had 2 uncles pass away, and 2 of my children had surgeries. So it was just that horrible year that I hope to never, ever relive again. And so, but I was still maintaining my job, and I was doing the best I could. And I was working from home some before working from home was a thing. And, but I was staying on top of it. I was getting everything done. And one day I opened up my email, and there was an email from my boss, no salutation, no previous conversation to back up this email. All it said was, tell your children they've used up all your sick days. And that was the biggest gut punch and the biggest blessing at the same time, because I realized I am not in the right place. This is not the type of environment I want to be in for myself or for my family. I'm not going to do my best work in an environment like that. So I very quickly resigned from that position. And fortunately, and the reason I say it was a blessing is because I immediately hopped in my car and drove 5 hours and got to spend the last 2 weeks with my dad. So it was the best thing that could have happened, although at the time it was the biggest gut punch. And so it actually has been very inspiring to me, because I always told myself from that point forward, if I ever have a chance to be a leader or have my own company, that I will do everything in my power to avoid a scenario where anybody ever feels the way I felt that day. And so our culture, I work very, very hard on keeping a culture of authenticity and respect and flexibility and family first values. And, I always say that work should fit into your life, not the other way around. And so that's probably the biggest source of joy for me in being an entrepreneur, is being able to create this environment, especially over the last couple of years. We have young families that work for Congruity, and, on any given day, you don't know what kind of call you're going to get from the school, that your kid's been exposed, or your kid's sick, or, we're shutting down, or whatever the case may be. And just being in a position to not just say, go home, it's fine, but go home, it's fine. And don't give it a second thought. Don't feel bad about it. Don't think, oh, I should be at the office, but at least they're nice enough to let me come home. None of that. We want it to be like, okay, I'm in an environment where it's safe to do this, and I don't even have to feel guilty about it.
That's very powerful. Heartbreaking, your story. Truly heartbreaking.
The opposite
Yeah,
end
it
of the
was-
spectrum from all of
Yes.
the.
And
I'll
one
never
of those,
forget it. I'll tell you that.
yeah, one of those universe moments. It's like, this is gonna hurt, but I'm looking out for you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
here it comes.
Yeah. And it really, you know, I think a lot of entrepreneurs have that story that is just the gut thing that drives them.
Yeah.
And, you know, for some people, you know, some entrepreneurs are former athletes and they're just super competitive and they're out to win the race. And that's never been me. That's not how I feel, but you know, everyone has that thing inside them that drives them. And for me, that story is what really drives me. And probably why I never fit in when I was trying really hard to be an employee. I just didn't. I mean, it's not that I don't want to be a team player. I do, but just personality wise, I was just like, no, I got to do this. I got to do this in a way that feels right for me. So that's probably the biggest driver of my entrepreneurial nature.
We can definitely relate to that.
Yeah.
Like,
everything from gut punches to not going to this. Yes.
Yeah.
Let me shave off this corner and that corner and, you know, push that to the side and see if I can be fine fitting in. Nope, not working. Out.
Yeah. And you know, I used to apologize for it. You know, I used to, in fact, I remember being at a concert several years ago when I was still kind of flitting around trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I was standing in line at the concession stand at this outdoor concert. And this gentleman that I knew came up behind me. He goes, "So what are you doing now, Betsy?" And it really embarrassed me. And I was like, "Oh, no, I'm settled in." And I felt very defensive. And then I thought, that's ridiculous. I've gotten all these different experiences that I'm grateful for that have led me to where I am. And I really want to get the message out to stop apologizing for your journey, you know? And I was all over the board and there's no need for me to apologize for that. It's, I'm laughing at your cat on the video.
Hey, Gus.
He joined.
Yes.
But I just, you know, I find that people feel like they have to apologize for their stories or their journeys. And once I let that go, and I worried about that comment way too much. I put way too much emotional equity into someone saying that to me. And once I learned to let that go and be like, oh yeah, no, I've had all these great experiences, and just really flip it on its head. It's not me bouncing around, you know, job to job and all of that. It's me finding all these different experiences of things that ultimately will lead me to where I need to be. And fortunately, 7 years ago, I landed. So I really want to encourage people to never apologize for their journey.
That's a wonderful message. Also can relate to that. Yes. I used to have a 2-year expiration date on all jobs and opportunities. And like, yep. And then some got shorter and some got longer. But I do can definitely relate to that feeling of, oh, what are you doing now, Christina?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It happened to me all the time. And then, you know, I was like taking off the last 2 entries on my LinkedIn profile because I didn't want people to see, you know, all the different things I had done.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, now, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about getting older is having the wisdom to know that it just doesn't matter. And you don't have to apologize to anyone for who you are. So that's what I love about the message that you guys are getting out there is just this being your authentic self. And, you know, we don't owe anybody explanations for how we live our lives. We really don't. And so that leads to so much peace when you let go of that. And I think that's just what comes with age and wisdom. I'm coming up on a big milestone birthday in October. I will be 60 years old, which I can't even believe because I don't feel like it at all.
You don't look like it at all.
Oh, thank you. But just, you know, just getting to that point in your life where you just realize what really matters and what really doesn't is very, very peaceful.
That's wonderful.
That makes sense.
Really, truly wonderful.
A book I read recently called Range by David Epstein, which is about like that, just sampling as much as you can, because then you start to figure out what you want to be. And obviously finding that actual inner peace is the goal regardless, but it's a good book if in case anybody is also feeling similarly a little out or wrung out, or like they're asked why they changed jobs so much, because I can relate to that one too. That one's definitely got some expiration dates.
It's so funny to think that colleges ask 18-year-olds to declare a major. Like, how in the world does that make sense? You know, it just,
You've had absolutely no experience with
me.
how the real world works.
None whatsoever. And what's your major? And you need to learn how to do it in 4 years, you know, and it just, to me, that there's something wrong with that logic, but.
Yeah, definitely. Usually boils down, for me at least, it boiled down to like, well, I like these professors and my friends are in those classes, so that's my major.
Or, ooh, that building's a lot closer than that building. I don't want to go into education because that's all the way across campus. So
yes, I can roll out of bed and just walk into class.
Yeah, exactly.
So you talked a little about your journey into Congruity Group. What led you to it? And I'm curious, you've done all these advisory boards, you've gotten to see these executives. How does it inform how you approach being an executive? You're a CEO yourself.
Oh, thanks. Great question. So we got to Congruity, like I said, just drawing on past experience. I got to travel all over the world about 20 years ago, working for a company pretty much like Congruity. And I was just traveling way too much. I still had kids at home. Youngest son was captain of the football team, and I was gone on Friday nights. And I was like, I'm not missing his senior year. So that's when I left and did a few other employment type situations. And one thing led to another, and ultimately landed here at Congruity. So all of those experiences have been really helpful to me. And now, seeing what the conversations that happen in the boardrooms have really helped me as a leader to understand that I can't do this on my own, and I need to validate my own thinking. You know, when you have an idea and you're excited about it, you think, oh, this can't fail. And you have to let that go and basically take the coaching that we give our executives. It's just take it all in, ask people, get different perspectives. You know, when we recruit for these customers to serve on the board, we make sure we have a really diverse perspective. We don't want all raving fans. We don't want all naysayers. We want to blend. We look at we actually have 26 different criteria that we look at when we recruit the board members. And that includes how long they've been a customer, their annual spend, what products and services they currently buy, what opportunities are there, what's their demeanor, are they introverts, extroverts. We look at all of these different criteria to make sure that we have a really diverse perspective represented on the board. So I try to remember that myself. And so I have various advisors. It's not as formalized as a customer advisory board, although we are working on that as well for us as a growing company. We want to make sure that when we do our CAB, that it is diverse perspectives. And so we're in the process of building that out. But in thinking about the advisors I have one that has a really strong financial brain, and he coaches me and sometimes tells me things I don't want to hear. And then I have, marketing advisors. I've got a cybersecurity team because one of our clients sent us a 17-page cybersecurity addendum to our contract. Well, it might as well have been, reading Mandarin as far as I'm concerned. I didn't understand a word of it. So you have to have these advisors that know more about their area of expertise than you do. And so having that broad base of advisors is just like the executives that we coach, just take it all in. Ultimately, you have to make the decision, you have to make the call, but you might as well do it with the best information you can gather. And being open-minded to it. Again, like I said, my financial advisor, a lot of times a perfect example, there was a candidate that we're considering for a role on our team, and we're pretty far apart on the salary. And he was like, Betsy, you can't afford that right now. And I'm like, oh, but this person's so good. And, I think they could really deliver. And yeah, but at the end of the day, you can't afford that person. Mm-hmm. And so, sometimes it's hard stuff that you don't want to hear. And that's what we tell our executives when we're coaching them is you're going to hear stuff you don't want to hear. But that's where the growth in your company comes from, is hearing the things that you may not be aware of that you really need to hear.
Yeah. That's a great example of integrity. It's like we're out there doing this with others, and we do it for ourselves as well.
Yeah. And I try. There are days where I'm just like, oh man, I just want to go do my thing. But, you get, again, it's the wisdom that comes with being around the block a couple of times, is you realize there are people that know far more about these things than you do. And frankly, I've hired people that are all a whole lot smarter than I am. And that's, you read a lot of these business books, especially for entrepreneurs, and they say, surround yourself with people that are absolutely smarter than you are, and put your ego aside for that. And it actually, I don't understand people that fight that notion, because having all of these people that are just brilliant on my team is the most amazing thing for me to say, oh my gosh, look how, I mean, it kind of backfires on the whole concept, because in my mind, it's a little bit of an ego boost for me to say, look at all these smart people I was able to attract to my team, but really it's, they do, and they elevate. When I started this company, it was me, and I was wearing all the hats. And now I've got people wearing lots of different hats, and they have all elevated what I initially created. They have elevated to so many more levels higher than I could have ever done myself. And so that's one of the great things about being open to the fact that you might not be the smartest person in your room. What I'm finding my real skill set is not the client delivery. It's certainly not sales. It's not finances. It's not marketing. And I really hate this phrase, but it'll resonate with some people. My superpower, but that's the buzzword now. But what I find that my skill set is strong in is being that quarterback, saying, here's what needs to happen. Here's some ideas, but you take it and run, and just making sure that all the cogs in the machine are working well together. That's where I finally figured out that's what I'm good at. And I'm not great at all of the other things that I have people doing, because they are far better at it than I am.
Yeah. That's a huge, I think, success measure for being an entrepreneur and being a leader, is being able to let go of needing to know everything, having to be the one that has all the answers, having to know everything. And it's a big transition from especially individual contributors to say, like, it's not about what I know, it's about what I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And, I've had people ask me, like, oh, you did all this work yourself for so long. Is it really hard to let other people do it? I'm like, it's the greatest thing in the world. It's like, once you learn how to delegate, yes, it is the greatest thing in the world. And if you can delegate to people you trust, that you don't have to follow up with, you don't have to second guess, you don't have to wonder, oh, did this get done? I never have to follow up with my team. It's just amazing. And so when you can build that infrastructure and then have those people building out their teams in the same way, it's, oh my gosh, it's the greatest thing in the world. I don't feel the need to be involved in all the details. In fact, it's kind of not what I want to do. Like, and sometimes if somebody brings me a whole lot of details, I'm like, no, I don't really need to know all of that. Just tell me what you need. How can I support you? But skip all that, because it just clogs my head.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think that's the essential leadership skill, is to just, you do you, I do me, and together we do something that neither of us could have done alone. That's it.
And I think some of the experiences that you have lead you to those kinds of skill sets, because I remember I was a freelance marketing person for a company many, many years ago. And I wrote a press release and I gave it to the person I was reporting into, who was the president of the company. He was like, this looks great to me, but we need to get the owner of the company. We need to get his sign off on it. Well, it sat on his desk for 3 weeks, and then it was old news, and then it never went out. So he was such a bottleneck, and he just didn't trust us to do our thing. And then it never went out. And so you can see, I'll never forget that story either. Like I said, all these different things lead you to the lessons that you need to learn. It was wildly frustrating to me. And that was like one example of a million things that happened like that. But, you remember those things and think, oh, I never want to be that bottleneck. So I really try to stand back and let our team do what they're great at.
It's kind of funny that one of the recurring themes here is that the gut punch moments end up being the most valuable, which makes sense. Also a painful lesson in itself.
Oh, I mean, this could be an 8-part interview with all the gut punch stories I have. Yeah, I can keep you fat and happy with gut punch stories for sure. But like you said, it's all learning experiences, and it's, what can I learn from this? What can I take away from it? And you just have to put a positive spin on it whenever those kinds of things happen.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And there always is something to learn. So it's like you're telling the executives, like, you're going to hear things you don't want to hear, but that's also what you need to hear.
That's where the growth comes from. It really is.
It is. It is where the growth comes from. It's like facilitated gut punching moments in a room, in a safe room.
Maybe the three of us collaborated on our next book, and it's just called Gut Punch Lessons of Life or something like that. Because between the three of us, I would say we have plenty of those gut punch lessons.
Probably have to make it into a series of books.
Yeah.
Volume
1 through 10.
Yeah. Well, this is wonderful. Thank you so much for all the stories. So 2 questions for you. One, you have brought it up a couple of times, but what is your definition of authenticity?
My definition of authenticity is when, after you have engaged with someone, you don't replay it in your head wondering how you could have done it differently.
I love that.
Wow.
Oh my God.
That's an excellent one.
Yes. Now I'm going to think about that every time I engage with someone.
Well, all those times you were like, oh, I should have said this, or I could have done that, or, how did they think I did on this? Or, you just start, doing the postmortem on how you showed up. And there's just no value in that.
There isn't. Wow. That's really powerful.
Yeah, that's the most succinct and very actionable definition I think we've had. That's great.
Yes.
You just play that, that movie in your head over and over and over, and then you drive yourself crazy. And you really don't know how people perceive you. So you're creating a story in your head that may or may not be accurate, and drive yourself crazy. So if you just show up the best way you can and be happy with it, and know that you're in integrity in everything you say and do, then you're being authentic, and you shouldn't have to think twice about it.
Yeah. And there's entire relationships that are just constant replay of movies.
Mm-hmm.
Which
there's
a lot.
That's torment.
That is torment.
Torment.
Yeah. That's awesome. All right. And then we know you have a book and a company and many other things. So where can people find all your stuff?
Oh, thanks. Company is the Congruity Group. And so we can be found at thecongruitygroup.com. And I love to link in with people. I'm a pretty active LinkedIn user. And so you can find me at Betsy Westhafer on LinkedIn. And our book, we actually have 2 books. One is called Profitability, the revealing story of why companies succeed, fail, or bounce back. And also our latest book is called The Rarest Advantage, how to co-create strategic value to retain and expand your key customer accounts. And both of those can be found on Amazon in both print and Kindle.
Excellent. And you have a podcast.
And I think we can.
Oh, yes. And we have a podcast. Yes. The Really Know Your Customer podcast. And the books and the podcast, I have collaborated with a brilliant customer experience legend named Tony Bodo. And what's really fun working with Tony is that his perspective is more B2C user level up, and mine's more B2B executive level down. And so we kind of meet in the middle. And so in writing the books and having these podcast discussions, we're able to bring all of those perspectives together. So it's just been such a joy and pleasure to work with Tony. And I learn something every time I talk to him. He's just brilliant.
Wonderful.
And I think Christina and I can also plug anytime you can see Betsy speak at a conference, go for it. It's always very fun.
Thank you so much. It's so good to see you guys. I'm so glad we crossed paths at CamCon, and I look forward to the next time we're in the same room in the same town.
Yes, us too. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. Bye-bye.